Hello and welcome to European Voices, progressive news and commentary with Jakob Hagenbeck. That's me. In our very first episode, we're going to talk about the Catholic Church and its treatment of homosexual couples and the controversy surrounding it. Now, the Catholic Church is one of the oldest institutions in Europe, and it's very conservative, and it has been traditionally very homophobic and thus not very accepting of gay people. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is kind of the collection of teachings that a good Catholic has to believe in order to be a good Catholic, simply put, of course, it's a bit more complicated, basically states that gay sex is wrong and naughty and therefore is sin, but that being gay itself is not a problem. So that means if you want to be a good Catholic and you happen to be gay or lesbian, you can't have sex, you can't live and experience your sexuality because it's considered a sin. Now, the homophobia of the Catholic Church has kind of different roots. Jesus famously never talked about the topic, so the Catholic Church is not referring to the teaching of Jesus itself, but rather to some of the heritage coming from the Old Testament, where there are certain rules for basically why gay sex is wrong, although also that is disputed. But basically, the homophobia stems from a very old view of natural law that basically says sexuality in nature exists for the purpose of procreation. Therefore, sexuality that is not aimed at procreation is morally wrong. Now, this is a very old view, an antiquated view, because nowadays, of course, we know that there's homosexuality in nature and that sexuality itself has actually very different roles in the social lives of animals and, of course, also of humans. So in that sense, from a non-religious view, it's really not justifiable to say that it's somehow wrong. Some people even, maybe rightly claim that it doesn't make sense to draw any conclusions about morality from what happens in nature itself. Now, many conservatives in the Catholic Church are very obsessed with especially gay sex, more so than lesbian sex. Maybe it's because, maybe it's because of sexual repression, but it doesn't really make that much sense to me to be so obsessed with sex and saying that it's wrong and it's so outrageous and that this is like the point, the hill to die on, that gay sex is a bad thing. But anyways, that's how it is. And it's more complicated than that, though, because there is an increasing pressure on the Catholic Church from secular societies to change their views on homosexuality. Now, talking about Europe, there's basically a split, because in Western Europe, homosexuality is broadly accepted in societies. Of course, there's still homophobia, and gay and lesbian couples do not enjoy the same quality of life as heterosexuals, but at least it is really, really good compared to just a couple of decades ago. Although in some other European countries, homophobia is still a rampant problem that really makes life very difficult for gay and lesbian people. Now, the Catholic Church is still in opposition to further gay rights. For example, marriage equality is always an issue where the Catholic Church is very much against it, saying that it's wrong and that it's kind of devalues heterosexual relationships and therefore opposes it. But still, the Catholic Church has changed its position in that sense, that they do not say or that they are not in favor of criminalization of homosexual acts anymore, which of course is a huge benefit for homosexual people, but far from equality and the realization of full rights. Now, this rapid societal change is of course has of course clashed with the Catholic Church and what the way it functions, let's say, because the Catholic Church is, as I stated earlier, a very old institution and is very much opposed to any form of change, especially when it comes to its doctrine. And that is based, or that is rooted in the fact that the Catholic Church claims to have or be in possession of the eternal, divine and universal truth, which kind of makes it difficult to at some point say, yeah, we were wrong about this whole gay thing. Actually, it's pretty okay to have gay sex. Although, it is changing, and it has been changing on other issues of morality, be it the capital punishment or also the view of sexuality. As I said earlier, the Catholic Church traditionally said believed that sex is only there to procreate, although no, the Catholic Church has also accepted that sex is fun and it's okay to have fun, and well, if you're married, of course, and gay people can't marry, but it's okay. It's okay to have fun, basically. Simply put, it's a bit more complicated, but at least that's some progress within the Catholic Church. Now, there have been some huge changes recently, especially in Western countries, in the Catholic Church, Western Europe, and also some parts of North America, where bishops have increasingly become more liberal. When 10 or 20 years ago they did not dare to speak out, or they simply didn't want to, or had another view, more and more bishops, for example, in Germany, have spoken out in favor of gay rights. Not full equality, but at least, for example, the head of the German Bishop Conference has stated that he is in favor of changing the catechism and, the teaching of the church, and basically not have homosexuality be considered a sin anymore, which would be a huge step forwards. And I think just the fact that this bishop said that is a huge victory and success for gay and lesbian people, and especially Catholics, of course. Now, what's the whole deal with the blessing about? So the Catholic Church blesses people, which basically it does all the time. It does to all people, and it also even blesses things and objects, like, cars, and sometimes even tanks, for example. But there still is a controversy about if it's okay to bless gay couples in lieu of, celebrating a marriage, which they can't in the Catholic Church. Now, there are priests and bishops who are in favor of that, and there are those who are opposed to that, especially conservatives. Now, what happened? I can show you this article that came out recently. Vatican ruling on same-sex couples prompts defiance, pain, confusion. It says the Vatican's directive banning the blessing of same-sex unions has sparked defiance among some priests in Europe and left bishops perplexed on how to minister to gay Catholics. So basically, this whole controversy has provoked the Vatican to chip in and say its opinion on that. Conservatives praised the ruling issued on Monday by the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, but it greatly disappointed gay Catholics who felt that church was becoming more welcoming under Pope Francis. Well, this is in the context of maybe the most progressive pope we've had so far, Pope Francis, who has in the past spoken out favorably of giving gay couples at least some form of legal protection. Well, not marriage equality, but at least some form, which is already progress. And the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith is kind of the office in Rome that oversees question of faith and what to believe. The Pope had to give his blessing to this ruling, so the Pope knew it. And there are even some people that go so far to say, actually, the Pope only accepted it and kind of gave his okay for this ruling because he knew it would spark a backlash, which it did. Now, in Germany, at the moment, there's a so-called synodal path, which is kind of like a dialogue between the bishops on the one hand and laywomen and laymen on the other hand. Of course, laywomen are faithful people who are not priests or bishops, for example. And they are also talking about the issue of homosexuality, and there's a lot of pressure from lay organizations to be more inclusive of homosexuals. And now it says here, in Germany, more than 1,000 people, most of them priests, had by Wednesday signed a petition in which they said they would not refuse to give blessings, according to Burkhard Hose, a priest who launched an initiative calling for pastoral disobedience. Now, if you hear the words pastoral disobedience, maybe you can imagine what that means. So basically, the Catholic Church is a very hierarchical organization, and splits in church history usually have been people who were dissatisfied with church doctrine or some organizational or power questions, and then split from the Catholic Church. So whenever people say that they want to split up or that they want to be disobedient, that rings an alarm bell. Now, well, the fact that this is happening already says a lot about the state of the Catholic Church, and that the pressure from outside and the emancipation of gay and lesbian people actually has a huge impact on the Catholic Church. So in that sense, you could say that, change is happening, which is a good thing. But the question, of course, is why is it relevant to people who are not faithful? Because, especially in Western Europe, many people are atheists, or they are not in any way engaged with the church anymore. But the church still wields a lot of influence, even in Western societies that are becoming increasingly secular. And the reason is that they still hold a lot of political power. They still have a lot of money. They are engaged in state institutions. They have real estate. And so they still have a lot of power, you could say. But they also wield a lot of cultural power, because, of course, even people who are non-religious are still impacted by the impact the church has and has had on our culture, be it being our norms, our view on even human sexuality, even if secular societies are more tolerant towards gay and lesbian people, it still has a lot of influence from Christian and of course Catholic doctrine. Also other parts of culture, like the way we celebrate certain religious holidays, even people who are non-religious, our myths or our generals, they're all impacted by the cultural heritage of the Catholic Church, of course. And on the other hand, there's still a lot of conservatives, socially conservatives, and sadly also homophobes. Even if they are non-religious, they feel emboldened by the stance of the Catholic Church and the homophobia that has been propagated by it for centuries. But this kind of split in the church, or this conflict, also has implications for gay people around the world. Now, the Catholic Church is actually diminishing and is getting smaller in Western societies, but it is actually growing in developing countries and in the global South, for example. And I think that really makes a difference if this debate is happening within the church. Now, in the church itself, I would argue Western countries, or like people from Western countries, still have a lot of influence. Like bishops from Europe and North America still hold a lot of power compared to the actual numbers of the faithful around the globe and where they live. For example, in parts of Africa or South America, where societies are just more still more socially conservative. Although, of course, there are a lot of activists that fight for LGBT rights in those countries as well. So I think the fact that even in the Catholic Church itself, there's this debate, and that there are bishops in high positions in the hierarchy that speak out in favor of at least some progress on gay rights, still means that they put pressure on homophobes around the world, that the homophobia is not unchallenged anymore, even by those in power in an institution that has traditionally been very homophobic. So I hope it will lead to fewer homophobic incidents, less homophobia in general. And I really do hope that the conservatives kind of feel under pressure and feel less emboldened to propagate the homophobia in the name of religion. So I believe this development is a really promising sign and a huge victory and huge success for gay and lesbian people all around the world, and especially those campaigning, and especially those in the Catholic Church. Now, of course, it's easy to say, why should we talk about it? If you are unsatisfied, you can just leave the church, leave the faith. And I think that is right in some circumstances, especially in Western Europe and less religious societies. But as I mentioned, there's so many faithful people around the world in other countries that are socially more conservative, and even if they leave the church, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have a better life, or that the societal conditions for gay and lesbian people are better just because they leave their faith. And also many people just don't want to leave their faith, which is okay. And it just really doesn't make sense in my view to kind of claim to propagate a message of love and then denying people who just happen to have some other form of sex their most basic dignity and right to live and love the way they want and in religious terms were created. So in that sense, I do think it's really a sign that can make one very optimistic about it, although there's still a huge way to go. And I'm not saying that the Catholic Church is now some form of progressive institution. It is still massively conservative, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. Of course, not the letter itself is a step in the right direction. The letter from the Vatican that basically said you cannot give blessings to homosexual couples, but the reaction from priests and bishops that want to defy this order and say that this is wrong and that they, of course, will give blessings to homosexual couples, this is a very promising sign.